Hey guys, and welcome back to the Spruce and Linen channel. I'm Janelle, and today we're going to talk about something that is super important, especially if you've just gotten started with weaving, and that is how to keep your piece straight. So let's get started. This video is brought to you by the Spruce and Linen shop, where you can find weaving looms, kits, tools, and supplies. Link in the description box below. Now, this is a tutorial we've done before when we first started the channel, but I kind of wanted to redo it, make a more updated version, and give you a few more tips and tricks that I have learned along the way that I think will be helpful for you. So we already have a warp here all ready to go, and we're just going to be using plain weave for this tutorial because honestly it doesn't really matter if you are doing plain weave or twill. A lot of these tips and tricks will be the same. One thing that we're going to talk about is the fact that yarn has a lot of give, especially a chunky twisted yarn like this. If I start to pull it, you'll just see how much bounce that it has. And because of this, we need to give our yarn slack as we're weaving, or it is just going to suck in the size of your piece and make you really unhappy at the end. Now, something I want to reiterate, and I try to talk about a lot here, is the fact that there is no shame in the unweaving game. If your piece is not going the way you want it to, don't be afraid to undo it and try again. Weaving is just one of those things that needs a lot of muscle memory, and you just start to get a feel for it, and it becomes easier as you do it more. So for plain weave, if you don't already know, plain weave, tabby, same exact thing. It is the most simple form of weaving out there, and that is just over one string, under one string. So I'm just going to do that all the way across this piece. This first row, we really don't need to do anything. Our warp doesn't have any other weaving in it, so it's pretty loosey-goosey here. But when we go into our second row, so now we're going the opposite of our first row with that plain weave. Now what we're going to need to do is give our yarn some slack. Now it's tempting to just do this. It's tempting to just pull it in, make sure it's snug there, and beat it down. Now you can already see that's only one row, and you can already see that we are pulling in. If we continue to do that as we go, the sides of your warp are going to get smaller and smaller and smaller and tighter and tighter and tighter. And that's not what we want. So what we're going to do is we are going to be snug against that warp string. Then you can kind of pinch it and pull it back a little bit because we don't want it to be, again, pulling in. We also don't want it to be way out here. So we're gonna make it snug. I like to hold it here, pinching it. We're going to create an arch. And then there's a couple of different things you can do here. So one is when you're working on a small piece, you don't need to give that much slack. Like there's kind of a happy medium. And this is where I'm talking about the kind of feel that you'll get as you weave more. But to me, that arch is about right. So what you can do is kind of pull, again, pinching on both sides and pull it there. And then you can dip it down in the middle, and you can also dip it down like so. So we kind of have this hill thing going on. And then when we beat it down, we have evened out that slack. So that's one way to do it. We're gonna go with another row, and you can see here, see how there's nothing holding this one yet, but see how our warp strings are staying really nice and straight on the sides? That is what we want. So I'm gonna go ahead and do another row. And once again, we're pulling it against. See how I'm kind of pinching this? And if you've seen other videos of mine before, you might notice that I do that a lot. Like I'll pull at this a little bit to try to make sure that everything is staying nice and straight. Because what we don't want is we don't want a loop on the side. Because that loop, if it's not touching that warp string now, it's never going to. And so you're going to kind of get this like weird scallop effect on the sides. And that's not what we want either. So we want to pull it snug against the warp string. So we want it taut, but not tight. So against it, but not pulling on it. So then we're going to create our arch. And again, I have just the habit of kind of pulling like this, but another thing you can do is you create your arch and you can kind of just give this a little strum, and it's gonna help even things out. Now on a piece this small, more than likely just dipping it down in the middle and then beating it down is going to be enough to kind of even out that slack. But if you're worried about it, you can definitely dip it down more like I showed you. And so now you can see again, we are snug against this warp string, but we're not looping out. And I'm gonna do another row. So those are just like a few different ways that you can do it. It just depends on what you find comfortable. So I try to think about when I'm weaving, I try to think about the little habits I have to kind of tell you what I'm doing, because sometimes I don't even notice. But what I'm doing here is like I automatically am kind of like holding this string out, pinching it, creating my arch, pulling it, and then I might dip it down and then take my comb to beat it down nice and evenly. And that's my personal workflow, if you will, while I'm weaving. But again, there are other methods, and depending on what you're weaving, you might need to adjust these things. And what I mean by that is that when you're doing a lot of plain weave, and let's say you're doing more of a true tapestry, so you're not having your warp strings show at all, and you're beating that down really tight, that's going to make the whole piece tighter. So then you have to be even more conscious about giving yourself the proper slack. So I would say in that case to do the bit of a strum method. So you're creating that hill, you're kind of strumming this, which helps even out that slack again. And let's just try, you don't even necessarily have to do the double dip, if you will. Now, the reason I like dipping it down, at least in the center before I beat it down with the comb, is that sometimes I find when you just beat it down in the center and then you start doing this, it might create more of a loop on the side. So if you're finding that that's happening, then just push it down in the center and then again in the other two centers, and then beat it down. So one thing that you might find, depending on what yarn you're using, depending on the way that it's spun, you might find that one edge looks better than the other. This is not something that you're doing wrong necessarily, but it has to do with the spin of the yarn. So on this particular piece, I can already tell that like this right side here is looking neater than this side. And that's just because of the direction of the twist of the yarn and the way that it's like rolling over this edge string. So because it's coming over this way and the way that it's spun, it's sitting flatter and nicer than on this side. Totally normal. There's really not a lot you can do about it. So like, again, we're never striving for absolute perfection here. We're just striving for precise. Precise, not perfect. That is something that I always have to remind myself of, because there's only so much you can do. And you know what? Here, look at that. We're kind of almost bowing out on this side now. So that tells me I may have been giving it a little bit too much slack. So let's try to correct that. And again, this might be in part because of the twist of the yarn. But see, that's making this warp string look a little bit straighter. So I'm gonna allow that one to just be that much tighter against that warp string. That's looking pretty good. Another thing that I want to mention is if you are working on a really large piece, you need to make sure that that arch you're creating is proportionate to how wide that piece is. So you can see here, when I'm doing it on this little loom, our arch here is only, 1.5 inches or so tall, and then I'm beating it down. When you're working on a really, really wide piece, you need to keep in mind that that arch will need to be even higher, and then you for sure are going to want to dip it in multiple places before you beat it down. So play around with it though. I always encourage you to just play around, try it. If things aren't looking that good, undo it, try again. Definitely try that strum method, try the pulling method on a really large piece. Strumming it might be a better option because you might not be able to truly pull it evenly, if that makes sense. So just play around, have fun with it. I hope this was helpful and you now know how to keep those sides really nice and straight and tiny. If you like this video, please hit that like button, subscribe, and click the bell to get notifications when I post new videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.